All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully you have that little MLA deal here. You know, if we're coming to the workshop, you get this. So obviously we're going to be talking about MLA Cram. So this is not a super comprehensive type workshop. It's mainly just to kind of give you a crash course, lesson on it. Now I know that I was talking to Cody earlier. You had said that you don't really feel super comfortable with MLA. Okay. Now what about you, Cassie? Do you feel pretty comfortable overall with MLA? Have you used it?
I'm a writing major, so I feel very comfortable with
I assumed that you would have some decent knowledge in this. So hey, anything I'm covering you want to elaborate on, definitely feel free to add it. Because one thing that I really like to cover as we're going through this is to actually look at some of the examples that you've done yourself. Because that's how I feel like we truly learn is when you are sharing what you specifically did on a paper and how you were able to do that. So we'll go through this. If you have any questions, just let me know. So some of the things that we're going to look at, MLA style just in general, we'll talk about that. We'll focus in on in-text citations, works cited page, and then we'll look at some additional resources. I'm actually going to take you to a site that I think is really good that can help you when you're doing research. So let's go ahead and look at the first deal. So what is MLA? It's Modern Language Association. Typically you're going to use MLA in like the fine arts. English courses, you tend to use MLA. When you start getting into more like social work or like psychology, you're going to start using APA. And I can tell you from experience with getting my undergrad in political science, we primarily use Chicago style or Turabian, which are almost identical. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can cite papers. A lot just kind of comes down to your discipline. But most college students, at least during those first couple of years, tend to use MLA a lot more in your classes. A lot of gen ed classes are geared towards that. Comp 1, Comp 2, that's primarily what they teach. And then it kind of goes from there. So one thing I want to show you as we're looking at this paper that you notice here, this is just a little example here that I popped up of what a format for MLA would look like. So MLA, for example, you have your name, professor's name, what the course is, the date that it's due or whenever you put there, and then you have your title centered, and then you have your your paragraphs. It's different with the APA because in APA you have a cover page, which is completely different from MLA. So that right off the bat should stand out to you. And you also notice that they have with the header and stuff, they have your last name and the page number up there at the right, the right corner there. That's also something that kind of stands out to me. And so I've seen some professors that say they don't want that on the first page. They want it on the second page. Depends on your professor. And so and that's one thing I will tell you from experience. When it comes to MLA, they're constantly changing some of the rules. So every couple of years or so, they've added some new changes to it. So what you learned one year, it may be slightly different in the next year. So you always have to constantly, kind of update, some of your knowledge in that area. So, but just to kind of recap, when it comes to creating that first page, you want to have your name, professor, the whatever your course is, the date, and then centered it will be the title of your paper, and then you go into your paragraphs. Obviously, you're going to indent your paragraphs that you notice there. So right off the bat, that should stand out there. Also, if we look at in-text, because one thing I want you to remember when it comes to writing your papers when you're using MLA, there are two things that you have to have. You have to have your in-text citations and then your works cited page, when you want to cite things properly. So when we're looking at in-text citations, the big thing about MLA is that you use name and page number. Name and page number, in those parentheses. And so those are the big ones. It's slightly different in APA because in APA, you also have to put the year of publication, which is also a lot different from MLA. So MLA, in-text citation, and I know you can hardly see it here, but you have a parentheses at the very end of the paragraph where you're quoting. You have the name, last name, space, and then the page number, then you close your parentheses. So, for example, here are some examples of how you could possibly do this. So, in-text citation, author page style. So, let's say, this is a quote that I'm using. Wordsmith stated that romantic poetry was marked by, A, and then in quotations, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, in your quotations, you have parentheses, then you just have the page number and the period that's on the outside of the parentheses. A lot of students make mistakes and put it in when you generally need to have it on the outside, the period there. Now, why is the reason that we use the page number there instead of the author in there? Why do you think that is?
Well, you used the source in your sentence, so you
Right.
just need the page number.
And that's why. That's the main reason why. Because I mentioned the person within the sentence that I'm quoting, that is why I only had to put the page number there. So, if I change that around and wrote, romantic poetry is characterized by the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and have that quotation, then I'd have to put wordsmith and then, or Wordsworth, 263 in the parentheses and then the period, because I did not mention his name actually in the sentence that I was quoting. So you need to know the difference between those two right there. And I will tell you that a lot of students make that mistake. They get a little paranoid, and so they always want to put, the last name and then the page number, even if they mention, the name in the sentence. I catch that is very common that they do that. What I would always tell students in the past is that it's good also to mix it up. In your paper, don't constantly put, the author's name stated, blah, 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 and then 263. Try to go back and forth, a little bit. So maybe, one quote, you have, the author's name, in that sentence that you're quoting, and then maybe another quote, you mix it up where you just have the quote, and then you have to put, the last name in parentheses. It's also the reason why I say it's good to do that is also it's going to show the professor that you actually know what you're talking about and how to do this. So you're using various ways on how you can cite. It's kind of to show them how much you really know. And so, but to recap, what are some of the things that we need to be looking for when we do this for in-text citation? Typically, you'll have the last name, page number, depending on how you phrase it in your sentence. Period always goes on the outside. Now, there's one exception. There's one exception to that. And that is if you are going to be doing like a long quote. Like if you have like more than 4 sentences and you have to do a block quote is what we call them. So then you actually have the period in front, which a lot of students kind of mix up there. So a block quote. So you got to be careful. So when I say period on the outside, most of the time that's the case, except for when you're doing a block quote. Then you have it inside, if it's a block quote. Okay, so citing authors with the same last name. This has happened to some students. You have, a couple authors out there with the very same last name, so how do you cite it and kind of, make the difference between the two? So, for example, let's take a look here. Although some medical, ethicists, claim that, cloning will lead to designer children, they're using his first initial, in his name. So R period Miller 12, so that's how you would cite that one. Others note that the advantages for medical research, outweigh this consideration, and then that's the other author. Then you have A period Miller, and then page, right there 46. So we use the initial, in their first name to separate the two if they have the same last name. So that's how you would do that. And so how many of you have encountered that so far? Don't happen too often. And so the good thing is you actually get to choose your resources. One of the things that when I was a student, I was always very careful which sources I actually would use. Because if I didn't know how to cite it, I didn't use it. Unless I talk to my professor and I just go to their office, I have no idea how to cite this, I really want to use it, can you show me how? And so, but if I really didn't know and I didn't have access to my professor to show me, I tried to avoid it if I could. And so, but that was just me on that. Okay, so citing a work by multiple, authors. So for a source with 3 or fewer authors, list the author's last names in the text or in the parenthetical citation. So, when we talk about, in-text citation, another term for that is parenthetical citation. So if you have a professor that says parenthetical citation, that's the same thing as in-text citation. You know, so sometimes they use those words interchangeably. So, for example, here's an example. Smith, Yang, and Moore argue that tougher gun control is not needed in the United States, and then they put the page number in parentheses because they mention those authors. And so, or if you decide to flip that around, the authors state, and then they put in that quote, and then in parentheses, Smith, Yang, and Moore, 76. So it just depends on how you want to phrase it within your sentence. But once again, I'd always tell you, mix it up, in your paper. So you're not using the same thing over and over and over. Tell me, for example, and we'll go with Cassie here, what happens if we have more than 3 authors? So we see the example here, what you would do. Smith, Yang, and Moore, 76. But what would happen if we have like 4 or 5 authors?
I believe what you do is you list the first 3 and then you put like something at the end, like I forget what it's called.
Okay, well,
Et al.
Yeah, we're going to find out. So, 4 or more authors. So, you take the first person's, in that list of collection of authors that you have, you take the first one, that it shows. So, Jones's. Then you put ETAL. That means and others. So, instead of having to list all of them, all you got to do is just take the first one, first author out, and then put ETAL. And so it looks weird when you're writing your paper and you're doing this. But so Jones, ETAL and others counter Smith, Yang, and Moore's, argument by noting that the current, spike in gun violence in America compels lawmakers to adjust gun laws, and then they have 4 parentheses. The reason why is because they put Jones, and others. And so if you didn't put Jones and others, in the sentence, and you just basically put in a quote, then you just put in parentheses Jones and others, space, put number 4 for the page number, and then you close your parentheses. A lot of it, you probably won't have to do this too often. I mean, obviously it just depends on your source that you're going to use. Cody, have you ever had to do this before?
No.
And so what do you think? When I'm telling you ETAL, period, what are you thinking in your mind?
It's crazy.
It's like a new language or
Yes.
something. It can be intimidating just by looking at that. And that's why I will say, I don't know if anyone can truly master MLA, APA unless you just have a lot of time on your hands. But, if you know where to go, and look this stuff up, you're probably going to be okay. Normally your comp classes, they give you like a writer's guide that has all those examples on how to do this. I still have some of mine that I've collected, and I would always tell you, once you've taken those classes, don't sell your book back. Keep them, because you will need it for other classes. Also, Purdue Owl is a great place. I go there all the time.
What is
I
it?
love Purdue Owl.
That's my go-to website.
Yes, it is like the place to go.
There's a lot of things that you have to remember with MLA, and I have a terrible memory, so
Yeah.
if I have a question, I just go on there, and it's pretty easy how-to guide for MLA.
And one reason why I would say that it's good, if you're not sure, obviously ask someone if you can, or go to Purdue Owl. But let's say, you've never encountered this. If you go up there and you type in, you can even go to Google or whatever, and just type in, MLA 4 or more authors in text. And nowadays it's going to show you, exactly what you need to do. But most of the time it takes you to Purdue Owl because it's so credible, place to go to. And
Can you
so,
spell that?
it should be on there on the PowerPoint towards the very, very end.
Okay.
So we should get there pretty soon. But ETAL means and others. Also in-text citation for internet sources. I wanted to make sure I included this because how many of us probably use internet sources as some of our things that we cite? First, my first question is why? Why do we use internet sources? There has to be a reason why we tend to use that.
It's easier than going to the library.
Exactly. And I did it myself all the time. Now, I will say, and the reason why I mention this is because some professors can be a little bit more picky than others. So sometimes, and I'll give you one example, in a lot of my grad classes that I took, they would tell me that I can only use 2 internet sources. They would give me a cap on how many I could use. And so, now I didn't like that because, it's a lot easier just looking it up. And so they said, only 2 internet, rest need to be journals or books. And so they were a little bit more picky. And that's when they start also talking about primary sources, secondary sources. We won't really talk about that today, but I just say know, that your source is a credible source. So, for example, it says the article details legislation that would require small contracting firms to implement new safety regulations, and then it has in your parentheses, then in quotations, a new safety legislation, close the quotations, and then have one, and then close your parentheses with a period. That's one example. Now, most professors, and this is what I've encountered, they tell you to take the first significant word from the title, if it doesn't have an author. So if you have an internet source and it does not have an author, it just has the title, and then it just discusses whatever you're going to use and you're going to quote it, then you need to use the title, in the parentheses. Now, most of the time they're going to tell you, I don't want to see the entire, title, because it can be really long. And so what they normally will tell you is, take that first significant word from the title, and in this case, it's new, because you're not going to use A as the first significant, deal in the title there. So you'll use new, and the big thing is you have to have quotation marks.
Why do you need quotation?
The quotation mark signals that it is a title of the article. So that's how they know. So the quotation marks indicates that it's the first significant word in the title. Now, if there is an author, you don't even have to worry about that. Then you just put the author's last name and page number. But how many of you have encountered looking at an article that does not have an author's name on there? It happens quite often. So you do want to make sure that you take the first significant word from the title. Now, one thing that I always say, when in doubt, cite obviously, but when in doubt, also talk to your professor. Just to make sure that it's okay. See what they say, because I've had some professors that are, the book is telling me how to do it one way, and then they want me to do it slightly different. Now, why would that be? I had this one professor, a history professor, really nice guy. He liked to use Chicago style. Well, the new version of Chicago style was different than what he was telling me I needed to do. And what I found out is that the way he wanted me to do it was how it was done like in the 90s. And I'm thinking, okay, why is this the case? It's because that's when he learned it, is how to do it. So he was still going off of what he knew and not the newer version of that. So, I told him, the new textbook is telling me I need to do it this way. And he says, I understand that, but this is what I know, so just do it for my purposes. And I was okay with that because, at least we knew up front. And so if you're not sure, always talk to your professor because they can kind of give you a little bit of input there. How many of us have actually done that? So, have you done that, Cassie?
Most of my professors want the whole website,
the whole one.
the title.
And I will tell you, it all comes down to the professor. That's why I always ask them, when I'm starting to write a paper, now what happens if you write the paper the night before? Will you have enough time to ask the professor those questions? Probably not. And so one of the things that I always try to do, if I could, was write those papers pretty early on. So as I'm still in the beginning stages of writing that, I could go ahead and ask them some of those questions, up front. One thing that I do, and I don't know if you've done this before, I hate, doing, works cited pages. I don't like it. It's not the best part of writing. I enjoy writing, not necessarily doing all the works cited pages, in text, all this stuff. But one of the things I used to do is that when I start a paper, once I know the sources that I generally want to use, I go ahead and create the works cited page first. Get it out of the way. Make sure there's no issues citing it right off the bat. And if there is any issues, then I can go to the professor or look it up, to find out what I need to do first. So when we look at works cited page, one thing that I would tell students right off the bat is that make sure you have the S. I saw a lot of students leave the S off. That's a common mistake. I used to teach Comp 1 and Comp 2 at Mabel Bassett Correctional Center. I taught at Seminole State College, but I also taught at a prison that was affiliated where they took some distance learning classes. So I had to teach Comp 1, Comp 2, and a lot of students that I worked with, they always left out the S every time. So that's why I like to mention that. So when you are creating your works cited page, and here's the example, I know it's kind of hard to see, but if you notice up here, it is centered. Works, because that's the S, then cited. Another thing that I would notice is they would not capitalize the C. I would catch that from time to time. They'd forget to capitalize the C. You got to capitalize it. So works, cited. And then you will typically have your paper alphabetical order by author's last name. So that's a pretty general rule right there. So all the sources that you have to have it in alphabetical order by last name. You also will indent the second line and below. So if we look here, for example, you have the author's last name here, comma, and then their first name, period. Then in parentheses or in quotations, you have the title, and then you have, basically the website or publication of what it is, and then, if it's like an internet site, you'll have, like web. If you notice there, you see web. That didn't, back in the day when I first started doing this, we didn't have that. We didn't have web. That's a change that they've made through the years. We used to have to put the entire link, in there. Some professors still want it.
Yeah.
So it depends on your professor. Supposedly now you don't have to have that because you indicate web, but most professors still say, I want that link anyway. So that's why I say always listen to your professor, because they may make some changes to this. And so, but if you look on all these, once it gets to that second line, it's indented. And you've got to remember to do that. And that's another thing that students have a problem with sometimes, is they forget to indent it. So you just got to make sure that you do that. So, and how do you indent that second line? Tell me how you would do that. If you're on Word, you're typing, and you're creating that, what would you do?
Well, you can press tab to indent.
Exactly.
There's a setting for it too,
Yeah.
which is kind of easier.
Yeah.
But either way.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways. Normally tab that's normally what I do. What happens if you use tab and sometimes it pushes everything over? Have you ever encountered that? Where it's like even wanting to push this first, the top line over, it pushes everything.
You can just put your cursor up there in backspace.
Exactly. Yeah, I have seen students sit there for like an hour trying to figure this out, and they get so frustrated. And then you'll go over there, you make one little change, and bam, you're set. Cassie, tell Cody how you fix that problem.
For what?
You just said you go to your cursor.
If you accidentally indent the first line or all of it, then you just click on the first line, put your cursor up there and just backspace, and it'll take out that first tab.
That's it. And so yeah, and it's the little things, the formatting issues that tend to hurt students in some cases. And I will tell you, professors, think about this, they get a lot of papers that they have to read. And so what a lot of times they do, they look at your first page just to see if you have your structure in place. What happens if you don't have that structure in place right off the bat? If your format is wrong, do you think they're just going to hurry up and kind of get a negative impression of your paper because the formatting is all wrong? And how do you think that's going to affect when they're actually starting to grade your paper? They're going to be really looking for things then. So format does matter. And a lot of times they'll go and look at your works cited page first, just to see what sources that you have, whether or not they're credible. So if they see some site that says Wikipedia, what do you think they're going to probably do?
Say it's not a credible source.
Right. So your sources do matter what you use. And so if they see a site that you got from Wikipedia, that's not good news. Then they're going to start doubting, your resources and stuff on there. So when it comes to works cited, they call it a hanging indent, for that second line. I just say hit the tab button, you're good, most likely. So a hanging indent is that second line and beyond. Alphabetical order by last name. And so citing an entire website. So I try to give some examples here on how you would do that. So normally you got to have the editor, the author, or the compilers that name, if available. Name of the site, the version number, name of the institute or organization affiliated with that, the date, the resources created, if available. Of course, the medium of publication, date of access. So down here is a good example. On here it has last name, comma, first name, period. Guide to literary and critical theory. So that's more the title there. Purdue, University. So that would be, the publication there. And then the date. And if you notice, on the date, what do they have? 28, and then they abbreviate November. So they have, NOV, period, 2003, period. I see some students put November, and they'll actually spell it all the way out. I've seen that happen. And then they'll put 28. You've got to do it in reverse. You've got to have the date, then abbreviate November, and then the year. I constantly see students that they'll switch that around. And then you have web, which indicates that it's a website, and then period, and then you have 10, and then this is the date that they actually printed off themselves. So 10 May, because you don't have to abbreviate May, and then 2006 period. I also notice students that a lot of times when they make common mistakes, they'll leave the period off. They'll forget to put the period there there at the very end. Now, if you have a professor who is a little bit more picky than this, and they say, hey, I want you to put that link, then obviously you would put the link at the very end, if the professor wanted you to do that. Supposedly, this is all you have to do, because you put web. Unless your professor tells you otherwise, that's what I would do. That's a good example of it. And now, how can you tell that this source here is from a website? What gives it away?
The web.
Web, yeah. So that right off the bat tells me that it is from a website. Just that alone. And so you can see the difference already between maybe a book that you have to cite a book, or if you're citing from a website, the word web gives it away. Now, I've also seen students capitalize all those for web, W-E-B, all capitalized. I've seen that happen before. You don't do that, but I've noticed that in the past. Some will want to do that. Okay, now how do you cite an email? Because you can cite emails. Let's say you're doing a research paper and you email someone that works for some company or whatever it may be, and you're interviewing them through email. You do have to cite that. And so this is an example of how you would do that. So there's a couple different ones here. Just some basic ones that you look at is that you'd have the person's name, last name, comma, then their first name, period, and this RE, because you basically that they've sent you back your email that you originally had, and then you put in whatever the topic was that you have on there. So when you type in whatever your topic was in the subject header, you put that. So online tutoring, message to, and then so and so, and then you have 1, abbreviate December 2000 period, and then you put email period. Indicates that it's an email. And so that's just one example of there. And so so just basically name, whatever the title was, message to the author, the date or whatever it was, and then email period at the end. Pretty straightforward. You can also do personal interviews as well, like in person with someone, if you decide to do that. So like if you decide to go interview one of your professors, like in a class or whatever, you have to cite that. From a source. So let's say, Cody, you are writing a paper, in a social work class eventually, and you decide that you want to interview, maybe another professor on campus that has some knowledge in that subject area. You can do that. You just have to make sure that you cite it. So you put that person's name. Now, if it's a personal interview, you actually have to write in their personal interview. So, some students think, well, if I just go talk to a professor, I don't have to cite that. But if you're using information that they've given you, then you need to. And so, especially if you're quoting, them. So, what about a tweet? You can cite tweets as well. Yes.
Seriously?
Yes, you can. How to cite a tweet. So, good example. Tom Brokaw. So if you're going to cite something that he tweeted out, you could put Brokaw, comma, Tom, and then in parentheses, Tom Brokaw, and close parentheses, period, and then whatever it was. And so SC demonstrated why all the debates are the engines of this campaign. Obviously period, and then you close the quotations, the date that it was done, and then the time, and then you put tweet. to indicate that it was a tweet. So that's just one example of how you could do that. Now, how many of you have, and Casey, or Cassie, you may have a better, knowledge of this, but have you ever even decided remotely to use a tweet potentially?
We've talked about it in class, but I don't even have Twitter, so I don't
Okay.
think it's important at all. But
Okay.
I could see, there's a lot of celebrities or political figures that have Twitters, and they make comments all the time. So yeah.
And now, Cody, are you kind of into social media?
Not really, no.
Okay. So, well, maybe in time, maybe you'll be
Yes.
one of those have a Twitter account and you'll be on there all the time.
I don't
If
think
so,
so.
if so, that's how you would cite
I'm
something.
old school.
Okay, so some additional resources, and we're going to actually go and look at one of these here in a minute. So some of the things that can help you along the way, because I can tell you, you're probably not going to remember all this, and I don't expect you to remember all this. So you got to know where to go when you don't have someone there that can help you. So if you're at home, or you're here on campus and you can't get a hold of one of your professors, where do you go? And so some of the things that you can do, now obviously you go down to the tutor lab and get help there, but let's say they're closed and you're here at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, one of the places you can look at is Purdue Owl Writing Lab, and that's what we talked about that briefly earlier. It's a great website that you can go to. They have about every single example imaginable, and I go there all the time. You can also, there's ebooks, there's journals. You can look at EBSCO, and that's what we're going to look at here in a few minutes. Have you ever used EBSCO or even heard of it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you like it?
Most of my classes, I love it. Yeah.
Okay. And so EBSCO is a great place. They have a lot of online journals there. RefWorks is another place, which is actually on the school's website. I really don't use that for me. But it is technically there. Another place that I like, and it's only because I went there. That's where I was a student there. I also taught at that place. That at Seminole State College's website, Kelly McBride, who's an English instructor there, on the faculty where her name is, she also has a link there that has her own homepage. She actually creates homepages, like websites and stuff, for a little extra money. Well, she has her own website that has a whole bunch of resources related to English and places that, like resources that you can use. The last one that I think is really good, and they've gotten better over the years, citationmachine.net. If you're wanting it to kind of plug it in for you, you just have to type in the information and then it formats it for you. And you just copy and paste it. Now, I will say, kind of my little side note on this, you do have to be careful sometimes, because sometimes it will make mistakes. I have caught it where it had a comma, not where it needed to be, or a period wasn't there. So, it does help, but you do need to make sure that it's 100% accurate, because every once in a while, I catch a few things, that's kind of messed up on it. And so, also, this is kind of what we've talked about, obviously in-text citations, various examples of how to, cite resources. But what I want to do real fast is I want to show you the EBSCO. So if you've never used it, this will definitely, come in handy for you. So, I'm going to go here. Now, I personally like going to Seminole State's website. The only reason why is because I know where it's all at. Now, you actually the school has to pay for you to have access to this. Now, because the school has access to it, I can still go to Seminole State Colleges and access it because we technically have it here. So if you were trying to get this at home and you haven't paid for it, you're probably not going to be able to get access to it. So you've got to be careful on that. So I'm going to go here just because it's easier to find, but they do have it here on the school's website. It's a lot harder to navigate. So Seminole State College's website. So I'm here now. I go to current students. So current students. Go right down to the library. Click on that.
Can you hold on 1 second?
Yeah.
Current students.
So go to current students. There'll be a link that says library. You'll click on that, and that's where we are right now. And so while we're here on this page, we look over to our left side, and if you notice as we scroll down, they have various databases. So there's more than one. Now, me personally, I like using EBSCO. EBSCO, it says full text articles and abstracts from newspapers, magazines, journals, government publications. So I would argue that a good majority of the articles that they have on here are credible sources. You know, and that's another thing that you really got to be careful with when you're writing your papers, because you know, you always have to be thinking, okay, is this a credible source? You know, so we'll click on that. So it takes us here now. Now, you know, there's various ones that you can choose from. So like, you know, if there's consumer health, business, you know, searching, I mean, various things. I just click on this top one here, EBSCO databases. That's the one that I click on. They even have a nursing reference center. So if you're a nursing major, you probably get sources from that place. But I'm going to click on the first one. Okay, so normally what I do now is I like to select all of them. It just gives me more options. Now you can try to narrow it down to certain databases because there's various ones here, but I just select them all. So select all, hit continue. So it does slow down your time a little bit on there, you know, when you do select them all, you know, to find all this stuff. So let's put in Spanish-American War. I've had to write a paper on this before, so. Okay, so what it's doing now is I type in whatever my topic is, and then I click, and then now it's searching. It is searching for various articles, magazines, journals, whatever it may be, government publications related to that topic. It's a little slow sometimes, so sometimes you want to give it just a little bit. So now it's popped up. So now you have all these choices to choose from. And I just say you have to look through there and just have to glance at them. You know, one thing that I like to look for, if you look right here, it says full text. You know, PDF, full text. I normally, if I'm going to use, you know, something from this, I want to make sure that it says full text. And the reason why is because you don't want one little page that hardly says anything, you know, because it's not going to be enough information. But if it has full text, it's going to have a lot. So I'm going to click on that. So American Relief Aid and the Spanish, you know. So